My name is Linda. I'm 58 years old, and during an Easter family gathering, I discovered a secret inheritance agreement in my parents' attic that wrote me out of their life's legacy. What they didn't know was that their betrayal would awaken a part of me I never knew existed. And 3 days later, they weren't celebrating a holiday. They were desperately calling their lawyer. It's a long story, but one I feel I have to tell. It's the kind of story that gets buried in polite smiles and holiday dinners, but it needs to be brought into the light. Before I begin, I'd love to know where you're all listening from. It's a strange comfort knowing people are out there, living their own lives, taking a moment to hear mine. Drop a comment and let me know what country you're in and what time it is there. It makes the world feel a little smaller and me a little less alone in all this. Okay, here we go. The scent of the attic was the scent of time itself, a layered fragrance of dry cedar planks, decaying paper, and the faint, ghostly perfume of my mother's wedding dress, stored in a garment bag for half a century. It was the Saturday before Easter, a day that was supposed to be about quiet preparation and family togetherness. My husband, Mark, and I had offered to help my elderly parents, Richard and Eleanor, finally tackle the archaeological dig that was their attic. It was a task long overdue, one we'd all joked about for years, but my father's recent heart scare had lent a new urgency to these long-postponed chores. It had been a stark reminder that someday is not a guarantee. "Just be careful on that ladder, Linda," Mom's voice floated up from the hallway below, thin and reedy. "Your father would have a fit if you fell. He's already worried enough as it is." I paused at the top of the rickety pull-down stairs and smiled, a familiar, weary smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "I'll be fine, Mom. I'm more worried about Mark trying to lift that trunk full of old army uniforms." Mark grunted from the far corner, wrestling with a heavy, footlocker-style trunk. "She's not wrong, Eleanor. I think your husband kept rocks in here." A faint laugh echoed from downstairs. The familiar banter was a comfort, a well-worn blanket of normalcy. We worked for a while in a companionable silence, punctuated only by the creak of the floorboards under our feet and the soft rustle of old newspapers brittle with age. I found a box of my old high school yearbooks and laughed, showing Mark a picture of me with a terrible perm. He found his old baseball glove, the leather stiff and cracked, and for a moment, he was a boy again, pounding a fist into its pocket. It was a slow, nostalgic dance with the past. It felt safe, the kind of ordinary Saturday you take for granted until the ground shifts beneath your feet. That's when the music stopped. Mark had moved to a stack of old, forgotten suitcases near the dormer window. He was on his knees, about to move one, when he suddenly went still. Utterly, unnaturally still. His hand, which had been reaching for a handle, hovered in midair. His back was to me, but I could see the tension lock his shoulders. "Linda," he said. His voice was different. It was a low, urgent whisper, stripped of all warmth. It was the voice he'd used once before, years ago, when he'd spotted a copperhead snake near the woodpile. A cold knot of dread, icy and immediate, formed in the pit of my stomach. Mark is not a dramatic man. In 35 years of marriage, I could count on one hand the number of times I'd seen him truly alarmed. This was one of them. I rose from my cross-legged position on the floor, my own movements suddenly feeling loud and clumsy in the charged silence. I walked over, my heart starting a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. As I got closer, I saw what had captured his attention. It wasn't a snake or a spider. It was a plain, manila envelope tucked neatly between two of the suitcases. What was so jarring was its condition. Everything else in the attic was coated in a fine, gray layer of dust, a testament to years of neglect. This envelope was clean, pristine even. It looked recent. I knelt beside him, my eyes tracing the elegant, familiar cursive on the front. It was my mother's handwriting, the same script that had signed my birthday cards and written notes for my school lunches. It formed two words, stark and official: inheritance agreement. My breath hitched. The words seemed to vibrate in the dusty air, alien and menacing. An inheritance agreement? Why would they need something so formal? My parents had always been simple people. Their finances were straightforward. A house, some savings, a modest stock portfolio my father managed with quiet pride. A will, yes, but an agreement? The term itself implied a negotiation, a deal. Whatever is in there, Mark whispered again, his eyes still fixed on the envelope as if it might strike. Don't let them see you found it. Don't let them know anything is wrong. Wait until we're out of this house. Just keep it together. I could only nod, my throat too tight to form words. My mind was a maelstrom of confusion and fear. At that exact moment, as if summoned by our tension, my mother's voice called up again. "Everything all right up there? You two have gone quiet." I squeezed my eyes shut for a second, forcing the panic down. I pushed a bright, brittle smile onto my face, a performance for an audience of one floor below. "Everything's great, Mom. I just got lost looking at old photos. We're making good progress. We'll be down for a break in a bit." Her cheerful reply, "All right, dear, don't overdo it," was a bizarre counterpoint to the silent dread that now filled the attic. Mark carefully slid the envelope from its hiding place, and with a sleight of hand added no heat the zest, slipped it inside the waistband of his jeans at the small of his back, pulling his shirt down over it. The evidence was hidden. For the rest of the afternoon, I was an actress in my own life. I moved in a fog, sorting through boxes of my childhood artwork, my brother's old sports trophies, my mother's collection of porcelain dolls. Every object I touched felt like a prop in a play whose script I no longer understood. I laughed at the right moments, made the appropriate comments, all while a single screaming question echoed in the chambers of my mind. What was in that envelope? We finally left just as the sun was beginning to cast long golden shadows across the lawn. My mother hugged me at the door, her small frame feeling fragile in my arms. "Thank you for your help, honey. You're such a good daughter." The words, usually a comfort, now felt like a brand. The moment the car door closed, sealing us in our own private space, the carefully constructed dam of my composure began to crack. "What is it, Mark? What do you think it is?" My voice was a frantic whisper. He didn't answer right away. He started the car, his movements deliberate, and pulled slowly out of the driveway, his eyes scanning the rearview mirror as if we were fleeing the scene of a crime. He reached over and took my hand. His was warm and steady, mine was ice cold and trembling. "Let's get home first," he said, his voice low and firm. "We'll look at it together." The drive was the longest 10 minutes of my life. Every red light was an agony, every passing car a potential witness to a crime I didn't yet understand. When we finally walked into the sanctuary of our own quiet house, I dropped my purse on the kitchen counter and turned to him, unable to wait another second. "Show me." He pulled the envelope from his shirt. It felt heavier now, freighted with a terrible significance. He handed it to me. My fingers, usually so nimble from years of typing and gardening, fumbled as I tore at the seal. Inside was a single document, several pages long, stapled neatly at the corner. It was professionally typed, dense with the kind of intimidating legal jargon designed to quell questions. I scanned the first page, my eyes jumping from clause to subclause, searching for the names. There they were. My parents, Richard and Eleanor Hayes, as grantors, my brother, Jason Hayes, as primary beneficiary, and me, Linda Miller, née Hayes. And then I found the core of it, the heart of the matter, the section that laid out the distribution of assets. The family home, the brick colonial where I grew up, where I learned to ride a bike, where my own children had celebrated a dozen Christmases, was to go to Jason. The stock portfolio, the one my father had always called his legacy for the kids, plural, was to go to Jason. The savings accounts, the certificates of deposit, everything of monetary value, all of it was to go to Jason. My eyes scanned down the page, searching for my own name in the distribution list. I found it in a small, almost dismissive paragraph near the end. I, Linda Miller, was to receive, and I quote,
all remaining sentimental items, including but not limited to family photo albums, personal heirlooms, and other effects of non-commercial value, to be chosen at her discretion. Photos? I was to inherit photos? And my mother's old costume jewelry? The air left my body in a whoosh, as if I'd been punched. It wasn't just the disinheritance. It was the cold, clinical language, the reduction of my entire life, my entire place in the family, to non-commercial value. And then, the final brutal twist of the knife, I looked at the last page, at the signatures, and at the date. It was dated 6 months ago. 6 months. The exact time my father was in the cardiac ICU after his heart attack. The exact time I was running back and forth between the hospital and my parents' house, managing their doctors, fielding calls from the insurance company, and making sure my distraught mother was eating and sleeping. The exact time I had, without a second thought, transferred over $20,000 from my own savings account to theirs to cover the mounting medical bills and household expenses because, as my mother had said through her tears, "We can't bother Jason with this right now, honey. He's got that big promotion at work. He's under so much pressure." The paper trembled in my hand, not from fear, but from a surge of pure, white-hot rage. They had taken my help, taken my money, taken my love and concern, and while they were doing it, they were meeting with a lawyer to formally and legally write me out of their life's work. The betrayal was so absolute, so breathtaking in its cruelty, that for a long moment I couldn't breathe. I just stood there in my quiet kitchen, the setting sun casting a warm glow on the floor, and felt the entire foundation of my world turn to dust. The scent of lilies and rain. That's the memory that came flooding back unbidden and sharp as a shard of glass. It was the smell of my grandmother's funeral 10 years ago. The sky over the cemetery had been a uniform, mournful gray, and the air was thick with the cloying sweetness of the funeral wreaths. It was a day steeped in loss, a day for clinging to family and promises. After the service, the core of the family had gathered back at my parents' house, the house that now felt like a crime scene. Relatives spoke in hushed tones, balancing plates of catered sandwiches on their knees. The atmosphere was heavy, not just with grief, but with the weight of a matriarch's absence. My grandmother had been the family's true north, a woman of formidable will and even more formidable love. I remember watching my father, Richard, as he stood by the grand stone fireplace, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand. He looked smaller that day, diminished by the loss of his own mother. He was a man who rarely showed emotion, who equated stoicism to strength, but his shoulders were slumped with a wariness that went beyond physical fatigue. He'd caught my eye, then Jason's, and motioned for us to come over. We stood on either side of him, a united front of the next generation. He put a heavy arm around each of our shoulders, pulling us in close. "Your grandmother," he had begun, his voice thick and uncharacteristically emotional. "She loved this family more than anything in the world. She and your grandfather, they came here with nothing. They built everything we have here. This house, the business, our name, from sheer grit and determination." He paused, his gaze sweeping around the familiar living room. He looked at the worn leather armchair where he always sat to read the paper, at the gallery of family photos climbing the wall next to the staircase, at the grandfather clock in the corner that had chimed on the hour for my entire life. "This house," he had said, his voice dropping lower, filled with a rare gravity. "This house is the heart of our family. It's not just bricks and mortar. It's a legacy. It's a testament to everything we've been through together." He looked at me, then at Jason. His eyes were serious, filled with a gravity I'd rarely seen. "I want you both to promise me something," he had said, his grip on our shoulders tightening. "Right here and right now, no matter what happens in life, who you marry, where you live, what successes or failures you have, you look out for each other. This family, this legacy, it belongs to both of you. This house will always be a safe harbor for both of my children. Equally. There are no distinctions here. Do you understand?" My throat was tight with a mixture of grief for my grandmother and a profound love for my father. Seeing this vulnerable, emotional side of him was rare and powerful. "Of course, Dad," I whispered. "We promise." Jason had nodded, his expression solemn and sincere. "We promise, Dad," he had echoed. A promise, a solemn, binding promise, made in a moment of shared loss and witnessed by the ghosts of our ancestors. And now that promise was worth less than the paper it was written on. The paper I was currently holding in my hand felt like a piece of ash, a remnant from a fire that had consumed my entire understanding of my family. The safe harbor hadn't just revealed hidden rocks, it had been intentionally redesigned as a trap, meticulously engineered to wreck my ship while guiding my brothers, laden with all the family treasure, safely to shore.
Linda? Mark's voice was a gentle anchor in the swirling storm of my memory. He pulled me from the gray afternoon of the funeral back into the warm, sunlit horror of my kitchen. Honey, breathe. I hadn't realized I was holding my breath. I let it out in a dry, ragged gasp that sounded more like a death rattle than a sob. There were no tears. The shock and betrayal were so absolute, they felt like they had cauterized my tear ducts. It was a burn, clean and deep. I had been a good daughter. The thought repeated itself, a frantic, desperate mantra. I had been a good daughter. I had called every Sunday. I had remembered every birthday, every anniversary. I had driven my mother to her doctor's appointments when her arthritis was bad. I had helped my father with his taxes when the numbers started to confuse him. I had sacrificed weekends. I had rearranged my own life, my own plans, to accommodate their needs. I had poured my time, my energy, and my own hard-earned money into their well-being. My salary from my part-time accounting job wasn't huge, but a significant portion of it had been diverted to them. Money that should have been padding my own retirement fund or going into a college fund for my grandchildren or even just been used for a vacation for Mark and me, something we hadn't taken in years. And in return, they had formally, legally, and secretly declared me and all of my contributions to be of non-commercial value. I sank onto a kitchen chair, the legs scraping loudly against the tile floor. The document lay spread out on the table, under the warm light of the setting sun. Its black and white finality a stark contrast to the colorful, happy life I thought I had. Mark didn't offer empty platitudes or tell me it would be okay. He knew better. He just pulled up a chair beside me, his presence a silent, solid bulwark against the tide of my despair. He sat with me in the ruins, letting me survey the wreckage. My mind, numb for a few moments, began to reboot. The shock started to recede, and in its place, a cold, analytical anger began to crystallize. The accountant in me, the part of my brain trained to find discrepancies and demand accountability, started to surface. Who drafted this? Which lawyer? When exactly? How had they hidden it from me? My mother's handwriting was on the envelope, but the language of the document was pure, impenetrable legalese. This wasn't a simple handwritten note. This was a planned, strategic maneuver. Just then, as if on cue, my phone, which I'd left on the counter, buzzed insistently. The screen lit up with a cheerful photo of my aunt, my mother's younger sister, Susan. My thumb hovered over the red decline button. I didn't have the strength to talk to anyone, least of all her. But some instinct, some premonition, made me answer. "Linda, honey, I was just calling to see how you were. Your mother told me you and Mark were saints today, coming over to help with that dreadful attic. You are just such a good daughter." "We did what we could, Aunt Susan," I said, my voice sounding flat and foreign to my ears. I know. It's a lot to handle, with your father's health and all. It's a heavy burden for you to carry." She paused, and her tone shifted, becoming more intimate, more conspiratorial. "But you know, honey, it's just how things are.
Jason, being the boy, he has different responsibilities. A man has to carry the family name, secure the future. It's a bigger, more complicated burden. It's only natural for your parents to want to make sure he's well taken care of, that his path is clear. You're settled. You have Mark. You're fine. Every word was a carefully polished stone used to build the wall between me and my own family higher and thicker. And in that moment, with a clarity that was both sickening and liberating, I understood. This wasn't just my parents' decision. This was a philosophy, a family creed I was never meant to be a part of. Aunt Susan wasn't just calling to check in. She was reinforcing the narrative. She was performing maintenance on the party line. She was a co-conspirator. My hand tightened on the phone until my knuckles were white. Thank you for your perspective, Aunt Susan. It's been very illuminating. I have to go now. I hung up before she could reply. I looked at Mark, and the hurt in my eyes had been replaced by something else, something hard and sharp. The grieving daughter was gone. In her place was someone I barely recognized. They're all in on it, I said, my voice low and dangerous. They think I'll just accept this. They think I'll cry, and then I'll get over it and continue to be the good daughter while they erase me. I walked to the kitchen window and stared out into the encroaching darkness, where the streetlights were just beginning to flicker on. Tomorrow is Easter, I said, more to myself than Mark. We're supposed to go to their house for dinner. We're supposed to sit at their table and pass the ham and talk about the weather and pretend we're a happy family. I turned back to face him, and he could see the profound, tectonic shift in my eyes. The woman who had left her parents' house that afternoon was not the same woman standing in this kitchen. I'll go, I said, my voice quiet but laced with steel. But I won't be pretending. The phone call with Aunt Susan was the catalyst. It transformed the formless, agonizing cloud of betrayal into a solid, sharp-edged object I could hold in my mind. It gave my pain a structure and a name: conspiracy. This wasn't a panicked, emotional decision made by two elderly parents under duress. This was a calculated, long-held belief system put into legal action, with my own aunt acting as an enthusiastic enforcer. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness, my devotion for blindness. They had assumed I would absorb this injustice as I had absorbed so many smaller slights over the years, all for the sake of family peace. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped my lips. There was no peace. There was only a ceasefire I didn't realize I was a party to. And the other side had just launched a devastating, preemptive strike. "What are you going to do?" Mark asked. He had moved to stand beside me, his presence a solid anchor in the churning sea of my emotions. He wasn't just asking a question. He was offering his allegiance. He was ready to go to war with me. "First," I said, my voice gaining a strength I didn't know I possessed, "I'm going to find out everything I can about the person who drafted this. They have a lawyer. It's time I got one of my own." I picked up the document again, my focus shifting. I was no longer reading it as a daughter. I was analyzing it as an opponent. The letterhead was from a small, local firm I'd seen on billboards around town: Bradley and Howe, attorneys at law. A quick search on my phone brought up their simple, dated website. Two partners, both men in their late 60s. One, Arthur Bradley, specialized in estate planning and probate. It had to be him. I pictured him in my mind, a man from my father's generation, probably a member of the same country club, a man who would nod understandingly as my father explained the practicalities of leaving everything to the son. I committed the name to memory. He was now adversary number one.
And second, I continued, a cold resolve settling over me, my lawyer isn't going to be from around here. I need someone who doesn't play golf with these people, someone who doesn't care about ruffling feathers in this town. I need a shark, Mark. He nodded, his expression grimly determined. He was already on his laptop, the familiar click-clack of the keys, a comforting sound of action. I know a guy from my old firm. His sister went through a brutal divorce a few years back. The things she told me about her lawyer, she was a nightmare for the other side. Let me find that name. While he searched, I sat back down at the kitchen table, the document spread before me like a battle map. My mind, trained for years to find the slightest discrepancy in a balance sheet, the slightest imbalance in a financial report, began to scan the pages with a new forensic intensity. I wasn't looking for emotional triggers anymore. I was looking for mistakes. I examined the signatures again. My father's, as I'd noted, was slightly shaky. Post-hospitalization shakiness. My mother's was firm, resolute. And then the witnesses. My Aunt Susan's florid, looping signature was unmistakable. The second signature was a name I didn't recognize. A Brenda K. Larson. Who was she? A neighbor? A friend of Susan's? The notary stamp at the bottom was from a local bank branch, the one near my parents' house. Every detail, no matter how small, felt like a potential clue. I took high-resolution photos of every page with my phone, creating a new encrypted file on my laptop. I labeled it simply, Evidence. The next morning, Easter Sunday, dawned bright and cruelly beautiful. The sky was a perfect cloudless blue. Birds sang in the oak tree outside our bedroom window. It felt like the world was mocking me, staging a perfect picture of peace and renewal while my own world lay in ashes. I chose my armor for the day with care. A simple navy blue dress, a single string of pearls, and a mask of serene composure that I practiced in the mirror until it felt almost real. As we drove to my parents' house, the familiar streets of my childhood looked different, tinged with the new, bitter knowledge I possessed. The tidy lawns, the cheerful Easter decorations on the doors, it all seemed like a facade. I felt a strange, chilling detachment, as if I were an anthropologist about to observe the bizarre, hollow rituals of a tribe that had secretly exiled me. When we arrived, the house was already humming with a forced festivity. The air was thick with the rich smell of roasted ham and cinnamon from my mother's apple pie. My brother, Jason, was already there with his wife, Chloe. He looked relaxed and expansive, the lord of the manor in his pastel-colored polo shirt. He greeted me with a quick one-armed hug that felt more like a pat on the back. "Hey, sis, glad you could make it. Smells good in here, huh?" "Amazing. Mom's outdone herself as usual," I said, my voice smooth as glass. Aunt Susan was there, of course, fluttering around my mother like a nervous butterfly. She descended upon me, her face a mask of concern. "Linda, you look tired, dear. You need to learn to let others carry the load." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I just smiled and thanked her for her concern, the words feeling like marbles in my mouth. The entire time, I could feel their collective gaze on me. They were watching, probing for any sign of weakness, any crack in my composure. I gave them nothing. I was a placid lake, determined to conceal the raging, turbulent currents beneath. The most difficult part, the moment that tested every ounce of my self-control, was facing my father. He was sitting in his usual leather armchair, a soft blanket draped over his knees. He looked frail, but his eyes lit up with genuine warmth when they saw me. "There's my girl," he said, his voice soft. For a heartbeat, I was just his girl, the daughter that adored him. The pain was a physical thing, a sharp, stabbing sensation behind my ribs. I had to consciously quell the urge to either burst into tears or scream at him. Instead, I walked over and leaned down and kissed his papery cheek, the cheek of the man who had promised me a legacy and then signed it away in secret. Dinner was a masterclass in collective denial. We talked about everything and nothing, the unseasonably warm weather, the new neighbors who'd moved in down the street, Jason's latest promotion at work, a story he recounted with great enthusiasm, though it was light on details. It was a conversation as hollow as a chocolate Easter bunny, meticulously crafted to avoid anything of substance, anything of truth. I played my part with chilling perfection. I complimented my mother's pie. I asked Jason polite questions about his job. I passed the green bean casala. All the while, the secret document felt like a physical presence at the table, a silent, unseen guest, visible only to me and Mark. As we were getting ready to leave, my coat on and my purse in my hand, my mother pulled me aside in the hallway, away from the others. Her hand on my arm was light, her expression a careful study in maternal concern. "Linda, honey, I hope you know how much we truly appreciate everything you do for us. We know we can always count on you." It was a test, a final probe of the perimeter defenses. She was checking to see if the good daughter was still securely in her cage. I looked her straight in the eye, my own expression unreadable. "I do what I do because you're my parents and I love you." And it was the truth. That was the most exquisitely painful part of it all. "You can always count on me," I added, my voice dropping almost to a whisper, "to do what's right." A flicker of something, was it relief or was it uncertainty, crossed her face before she masked it with a bright maternal smile and hugged me. "Happy Easter, dear." "Happy Easter, Mom," I replied, my voice a perfect echo of her own empty warmth. As we drove away from the house, I didn't look back. The charade was over, the reconnaissance was complete. The war was about to begin.
Monday morning dawned gray and businesslike, a welcome antidote to the cloying, pastel-colored hypocrisy of Easter. The world felt serious again, and so did I. Mark had stayed up late the night before and found the name of the lawyer his colleague's sister had used. Her name was Evelyn Reed, and her firm was located in the city, a good hour's drive away, far from the incestuous social and professional circles of my hometown. Her website was sleek, professional, and her bio was formidable. She was a graduate of a top-tier law school and specialized in complex family litigation and asset disputes. She was exactly the shark I was looking for. I called her office at 9 a.m. sharp, my heart pounding a steady, determined rhythm. I expected to get a paralegal, to be told Miss Reed was booked for weeks, to be put on a waiting list. But when I briefly and calmly explained the nature of my call, a disputed inheritance agreement involving an elderly parent's recent health crisis and potential undue influence from another family member, the receptionist's tone shifted from brisk to engaged. "Please hold for one moment, Mrs. Miller," she said. I was on hold for less than a minute, a clear sign that my situation had hit a specific, high-priority trigger within their firm. "Mrs. Miller?" The receptionist came back on the line. "Miss Reed can clear her schedule to see you this afternoon at 2 o'clock. Can you make it?" The suddenness of it was jarring, but it was a jolt of pure adrenaline. "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "I'll be there." The hours leading up to the appointment were a blur of focused preparation. I wasn't just a grieving daughter anymore. I was a client preparing a case. I printed out the high-resolution photos of the agreement. I typed up a clear, bullet-pointed timeline of events, the date of my father's heart attack, the dates of my financial transfers to my parents' account, the date on the agreement, the date of my conversation with Aunt Susan. I transcribed Susan's words as accurately as I could remember them. I was building a fortress of facts, brick by meticulous brick. Mark took the afternoon off work to come with me. He'd said, "You're not doing this alone," and it wasn't a question. Evelyn Reed's office was on the 30th floor of a downtown skyscraper, a world of glass and steel that was a universe away from the folksy wood-paneled office of Bradley and Howe I had pictured in my mind. The view from the waiting room was panoramic, a god's-eye perspective of the city below. It was a place of power. Evelyn Reed herself matched her surroundings. She was a woman in her late 40s, impeccably dressed in a tailored gray suit, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She radiated an aura of no-nonsense competence. She shook my hand firmly and wasted no time on small talk. "Please, call me Evelyn." She gestured for us to sit in the 2 leather chairs opposite her large, uncluttered desk. My assistant gave me the broad strokes. "Why don't you walk me through it from the beginning? Don't leave anything out, no matter how small or emotional it seems." And so I did. With Mark at my side, I laid out the entire sordid story. I started with the promise my father had made at my grandmother's funeral, the emotional bedrock of my sense of security. I described my father's health crisis, my role as the primary caregiver and financial backstop. I recounted the discovery in the attic, the shock of reading the document, and the chilling phone call with my Aunt Susan. I transcribed Susan's words as accurately as I could remember them. I was building a fortress of facts, brick by meticulous brick. When she finished, the silence in the room stretched on, thick and heavy. She spent a long time examining the papers, reading every line of the agreement, her brow furrowed in concentration. I had come here clinging to a desperate hope that she, with her trained eye, would spot a fatal flaw, a legal silver bullet that would make this whole nightmare disappear. I watched her face for any sign of a breakthrough, any triumphant flicker in her eyes. I saw none. Finally, she leaned back in her chair and stapled her fingers, looking at me with a direct, almost clinical gaze. Linda, I need to be very direct with you. This is a professionally drafted document. The language is precise, the clauses are standard, and on the surface, it appears to be ironclad. The air rushed out of my lungs. The words ironclad echoed in my head. It was the sound of a prison door slamming shut. What? I stammered, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. But it's not fair. It was done in secret. And what about the witnesses? My aunt is clearly a biased party. It's not ideal, she conceded with a slight impatient wave of her hand, and a good lawyer would have advised against it for that very reason. But it's not strictly illegal for a family member to witness a document like this, as long as they're not a direct beneficiary. And the notary stamp from the bank is valid. They seem to have followed the letter of the law, even if the spirit of it is rotten. So that's it? My voice cracked. The composure I had so carefully maintained began to crumble. Evelyn leaned forward, her gaze intensifying. I need to not say that. I said the document is strong. That means our strategy cannot be to simply attack the paper. A legal challenge on the grounds of undue influence or lack of capacity is an uphill battle, Linda. An incredibly difficult, expensive, and painful one. It would mean putting your father's mental state on trial. It would involve deposing doctors, nurses, and family members. It would drag your family's dirty laundry into a very public forum and likely drain your finances in the process. And after all that, there's a very real chance we could lose. The brutal honesty of her assessment was like a physical blow. She was right. The thought of putting my frail, beloved father through a public competency hearing was sickening. I couldn't do that to him, even now. That was a battle I couldn't win and wouldn't want to. I slumped back in my chair, the full weight of my predicament settling on me. They had thought of everything. They had consulted a professional. They had built a perfect legal fortress, and I was on the outside, unarmed. So, what can I do? I whispered, the fight finally draining out of me, leaving behind a hollow ache. Evelyn was silent for a long moment, her sharp eyes studying me, gauging my resilience. Then a subtle shift occurred in her expression. The lawyer receded, and the strategist emerged. It was the look of a grandmaster at a chessboard, seeing not just the next move, but the entire game.
"The mistake your family made," she said slowly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial level, "is thinking the fight is about the document. The document is just a piece of paper. The real fight is about leverage. They've written the rules of their game, a game we are likely to lose. So we don't play their game. We invent a new one." She leaned back in her chair, a faint, dangerous smile touching her lips. Her eyes gleamed with a fierce intelligence that was both intimidating and exhilarating. They think their greatest asset is this piece of paper, this ironclad agreement. They are wrong. She paused for effect. Their biggest liability is your brother, Jason. My head snapped up. My despair, which had been a suffocating fog, began to burn away under the sudden, bright heat of her words. "Jason? Tell me everything you know about him," Evelyn said, picking up her pen again. "His work, his finances, his lifestyle, his ego. Forget the law for a minute, Linda. Let's talk about reality." And in that moment, the path forward, which had seemed like a dead end, suddenly split wide open. The game wasn't over.
It had just begun. Leaving Evelyn Reed's office felt like stepping out of a dark, suffocating room into the sharp, clean air of a storm. The despair was gone, replaced by a chilling, electrifying clarity. I was no longer a victim seeking a legal loophole. I was a combatant, and Evelyn had just handed me a new map of the battlefield, one where the terrain was not law, but human nature. That night, our quiet, comfortable kitchen table was transformed into my war room. Mark, sensing the shift in me, became my silent, efficient lieutenant. He made a fresh pot of strong black coffee while I pulled out a new legal pad, not unlike the one Evelyn had used. But I wasn't jotting down legal theories. I was creating psychological profiles, dissecting my own family as if they were subjects in a case study. "Okay, Mark," I said, my voice filled with a new cold energy that surprised even me. "They want to play by the rules of their precious ironclad document. Fine, but they're about to find out that life has other rules. The rules of finance, the rules of reputation, the rules of consequences." My plan began to form, not as a single dramatic confrontation, but as a campaign of psychological warfare, waged with precision and overwhelming factual superiority. "Mark," I said, turning to him, my grief had been replaced by a sharp, focused sense of purpose. "I need you to do some digging, deep digging. Public records, business filings, court records, social media, anything you can find on a company Jason started about 3 years ago. I think it was called JS Ventures or something equally unimaginative." He nodded, his expression serious, his role in this now clearly defined. "On it. I'll start with the state's business registry." While he set to work on his computer, the rhythmic clicking of the keys a comforting sound of progress, I focused on my own area of expertise, accounting. For years, I had helped my parents with their taxes, a chore they were happy to offload. Because of that, I had copies of their financial statements going back a decade. I knew their situation. Or at least I thought I did. More importantly, out of a sense of duty and a habit of meticulousness, I had kept a detailed record of the financial support I had provided them since Dad's health had begun its serious decline. It wasn't a loan. In my heart, it was a gift, given freely, out of love. But I had the receipts. Every check I had written for their property taxes, every medical bill I had paid directly to the hospital from my own account, every transfer I had made to cover their living expenses when their own funds were tight. I had never thought to add it all up. I spent the next 2 days in a state of intense, quiet focus. I was no longer grieving. I was auditing. The pain was still there, a low-frequency hum beneath the surface, but it was now fuel for the engine of my resolution. I felt like a forensic accountant, piecing together the financial story of a betrayal. I created a new spreadsheet, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I entered every date, every amount, every purpose. The numbers grew, line by line. The breakthrough came on Wednesday evening. I was in my home office, staring at the final calculated sum at the bottom of my spreadsheet. A number so large, it made me feel dizzy. At the same time, Mark called out from the living room. "Linda, you need to see this." His voice was grim. I walked in, and he turned his laptop screen towards me. He had found it. JS Ventures, LLC, registered to Jason Hayes. And it was a train wreck. Mark hadn't just found a registration, he had found a trail of destruction in the public court records. The company had been sued by 2 of its primary suppliers for non-payment. It had defaulted on a small business loan from a commercial lender. There was a tax lien filed by the state for unpaid payroll taxes. And the final, damning nail in the coffin, a notice of involuntary dissolution, filed by the state 2 months ago for failure to maintain a registered agent. The company wasn't just defunct. It had been killed by neglect and incompetence. But that wasn't the truly shocking part. The truly shocking part was the amount of debt listed in the various filings. It was a staggering number, far more than a small marketing venture should ever have accumulated. "My God," I whispered, sinking onto the arm of the sofa. Suddenly, the whole ugly picture snapped into sharp, horrifying focus. This was desperation to secure the inheritance, the secrecy, the manipulation of our aging, frightened parents. This wasn't about favoritism, not really. This was a desperate, frantic bailout. Jason was facing financial and social ruin, and he had concocted a story, sold our parents on a fantasy to get them to hand over their life's work to plug the gaping holes in his sinking ship. He hadn't just been greedy, he had been cornered, and cornered animals are the most dangerous. I looked from the screen displaying Jason's financial ruin to the spreadsheet I had just completed, displaying my quiet, substantial contributions. An idea, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, formed in my mind. It was a perfect, terrible, and beautiful idea. "I think I'm a sentimental daughter, only worthy of photo albums," I said softly, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. "They're about to meet Linda Miller, the primary creditor." The discovery of Jason's financial abyss was the key, the master key that unlocked the entire puzzle. It reframed everything. This was no longer a simple, albeit cruel, case of a spoiled son being favored over a dutiful daughter. This was a cover-up, a desperate, high-stakes conspiracy to use our parents' life savings, their entire legacy, as a secret bailout fund to plug the gaping holes in Jason's sinking ship. The knowledge was empowering, but it was also terrifying. Facts and figures on a screen were one thing, leveraging them against my own family was another.
My next steps had to be handled with the precision of a surgeon. I had the financial evidence, the what. Now I needed the human context, the why and how. I needed to understand what Jason had told them, how deep the deception ran, and how aware my parents were of the true extent of the disaster. I couldn't get that from public records. I had to get it from the inside. And that meant turning to the two people who were on the periphery but had a clear view of the main stage: my Uncle Robert and my parents' longtime housekeeper, Maria. I decided to start with Uncle Robert, my father's younger and more level-headed brother. He was a retired civil engineer, a man of logic, blueprints, and integrity. He had always treated Jason and me with an even-handed affection that I now realized was a rare gift. He valued fairness and common sense above all else, and he had no patience for drama or foolishness. He was my best bet for an honest, unfiltered perspective. I called him that evening, my heart pounding a little. This was my first move in the active phase of my campaign. "Uncle Robert, it's Linda." "Linda, how are you, kiddo? I was just telling Patricia the other day we need to have you and Mark over for dinner. How's your dad doing? Is he behaving himself?" His voice was so normal, so warm, it almost made me lose my nerve. I took a deep breath, anchoring myself in my newfound resolve. "That's actually why I'm calling," I said, carefully modulating my voice to sound concerned, not accusatory. "I'm a little worried about them, to be honest." I let that hang in the air for a moment. "I was over there for Easter, helping them clear out the attic, and something just feels off. Dad seems more stressed than he should be, given that his recovery is going well. And Mom is being unusually defensive, especially about their finances. It's not like her." I was planting a seed of concern, not accusation. I was inviting him into my worry, making him a fellow observer. There was a thoughtful pause on the other end of the line. I could picture him in his study, leaning back in his leather chair, stroking his chin. "You know," he said slowly, his voice losing some of its cheer, "I'm glad you called. I had dinner with your dad last month, just the two of us, and you're right. He seemed distracted, jumpy. He mentioned something about helping Jason with a major investment opportunity. Said Jason was on the cusp of something big and just needed a little family backing to get it over the finish line." Bingo. It was a small confirmation, but it was crucial. My father was actively repeating Jason's narrative. This wasn't a secret from the rest of the family. It was a carefully curated story, with me as the sole member of the audience left in the dark.
He told me to be careful at his age, Robert continued, a note of frustration in his voice. I told him retirement savings are for retiring, not for speculating. But you know your father, stubborn as a mule once he gets an idea in his head, especially if your mother is backing the play. I just have a bad feeling, I said, letting a touch of genuine daughterly worry into my voice. I feel like I'm on the outside looking in, and I don't know what's really going on. Well, you know your mother, Robert sighed, a sound I'd heard him make many times before when discussing his sister-in-law. She's always believed the sun rises and sets on your brother. It's been that way since he was born. Don't take it personally, Linda. It's a blind spot for her. He paused. But you keep an eye on them. If you think something is seriously wrong, you call me. Your father may not listen to you when it comes to Jason, but he'll listen to me. I can be a real pain in his neck when I need to be. Thank you, Uncle Robert, I said, my voice thick with genuine gratitude. That means more than you know. I hung up the phone, feeling a small but significant victory. I now had a powerful, respected ally in my corner, and he didn't even know the war had started yet. He was simply on the side of caution and common sense, which was now my side too. My next move was even more delicate, requiring a completely different approach. Maria, my parents' housekeeper, had been with them for over 20 years. She had come to this country from the Philippines, worked tirelessly, and raised 3 successful children of her own. She was quiet, observant, and possessed a spine of steel beneath her gentle demeanor. She was practically family. She had seen everything: my awkward teenage years, Jason's explosive temper tantrums, my parents' quiet pride, my mother's social anxieties. Her loyalty to my parents was fierce, but her sense of right and wrong was, I suspected, even fiercer. I couldn't just call her and ask her to spy for me. That would be a gross betrayal of her trust and position. I had to create an opportunity for her to volunteer information if she chose to. So I did something a little manipulative, I admit, but I was done playing fair. The next afternoon, I drove to my parents' neighborhood. I didn't go to their house. I went to the small local grocery store that I knew Maria did her shopping every Tuesday afternoon after she finished her work. I timed it perfectly. I was in the produce aisle, pretending to be deeply engrossed in the selection of avocados, when she walked in, pushing a shopping cart. "Maria!" I said, turning as if I had just noticed her, my face a mask of pleasant surprise. "What a coincidence! It's so good to see you!" Her face lit up in a genuine, warm smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "Linda, my goodness, what are you doing all the way over here?" "Oh, I was just in the area for an appointment and needed to pick up a few things," I lied smoothly. We chatted for a few minutes about her grandchildren, their latest achievements in school, and the unseasonably warm weather. Then I gently steered the conversation. "I was so glad I could help Mom and Dad with the attic the other day, but honestly, Maria, they seem so tired, more than just old tired. I worry about them." Maria's face faded slightly. Her dark, intelligent eyes searched mine. She leaned in closer, instinctively lowering her voice. "They are tired, Linda. They are very stressed." She glanced around the brightly lit aisle as if the boxes of cereal on the shelves might be listening. "It's Mr. Jason. He comes over a lot now, not just for dinner. During the day, there are many intense conversations, closed-door meetings in your father's study." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my expression of simple, daughterly concern. "Oh, dear. I hope everything's okay with his business. Mom mentioned he was working on something big."
Maria just shook her head, a look of deep, profound sadness in her eyes. It was the look of a woman who sees everything but can say very little. "I don't know about business, Linda, but I know what I see. I see your mother, sitting at the kitchen table, crying after he leaves. I see your father, up late at night, staring at bank statements and papers, looking like the weight of the world is on his shoulders." She reached out and patted my arm, her touch surprisingly firm. "You are a good daughter, Linda. You have a good heart. That is all I will say." She gave my arm a final, meaningful squeeze, and then, with a small, sad smile, she moved on with her shopping cart toward the dairy aisle. I stood there for a long moment, an avocado forgotten in my hand. Maria hadn't betrayed any specific confidences. She hadn't told me a single detail from behind those closed doors. But she had given me everything I needed. She had confirmed the emotional turmoil. She had painted a vivid picture of my parents' distress. And she had validated my fight. "You are a good daughter." The words echoed in my mind. Yes, I was. And a good daughter doesn't stand by and watch her parents be let off a cliff, even if they are going willingly. I drove home. My resolve no longer just steel. It was forged, tempered, and razor-sharp. My investigation was complete. I had the motive, I had the means, and I had the opportunity. Now, all I needed was to set the stage for the final act. The conversations with Uncle Robert and Maria were the final crucial pieces of intelligence. They provided the human context, the emotional texture that the cold, hard facts of Jason's debt couldn't convey. My parents weren't just being malicious or greedy. They were being manipulated by their deepest fears. Fear of their son failing, fear of their own mortality, fear of a tarnished legacy. And Jason, in his desperation, was exploiting those fears with the ruthless precision of a predator. My fight was no longer just for myself, for my own rightful inheritance. In a strange, twisted way, it was for them too, to save them from the catastrophic consequences of their own misguided love and terrible decision. But a good general, as I was quickly learning to become, doesn't go to war alone. A frontal assault, a legal challenge, was still a losing game, according to Evelyn. My strategy had to be one of overwhelming psychological and familial pressure. I needed allies, not soldiers, but a board of directors, a coalition of the sane who would stand with me not in a courtroom, but in my parents' living room. My first and most important ally was already by my side, sleeping next to me every night. Mark. He had been my rock, my silent partner in the late-night strategy sessions at our kitchen table. He was the one who would unearth the first damning proof of Jason's failed business, and his calm, logical presence was the ballast that kept my own righteous anger from boiling over into recklessness. He was my chief of staff, my confidant, my anchor. "So, what's next?" he asked that evening, after I recounted my carefully orchestrated encounters with Robert and Maria. He was looking at my legal pad, which was now covered with diagrams and notes, a testament to my transformation. We have the information, we have the emotional context. How do we deploy it? "I need to control the narrative," I said, pacing the length of our kitchen, the motion helping me think. Right now, in their minds, they have a simple, defensible story. Jason is the responsible son securing the family's future, and I'm this sentimental daughter who is already taken care of and doesn't need to worry about such things. If I challenge them directly, they'll immediately frame me as greedy, ungrateful, and destructive. We need to dismantle their story before we even walk into the room. We need to frame them. That's when I knew I had to bring in the next generation, my own children, Sarah and Ben. They were both adults now, in their early 30s with careers and families of their own. I had shielded them from the initial shock of the discovery, not wanting to burden them or taint their relationship with their grandparents. But now, I needed them. They were not just my children, they were my parents' only grandchildren. Their opinion, their presence, their judgment mattered. They were the legacy my parents claimed to be protecting. I invited them over for dinner the next night, with a specific request. "Just the two of you, no spouses, no grandkids. I need to talk to you about something serious." The request alone put them on alert. After a tense, quiet dinner, we sat in the living room and I laid it all out for them. I didn't soften the blow. I showed them the pictures of the agreement on my laptop. I walked them through the timeline. I told them about Jason's deaths, showing them the public records Mark had found. And then I explained the choice I had made, not to be a victim, but to fight back, not with rage, but with strategy. Their reactions were a mirror of my own, compressed into a few minutes. First stunned disbelief, then a fierce, protective anger on my behalf. "Grandma and Grandpa did what?" Ben said, his voice low and dangerous. He was gripping his coffee mug so tightly his knuckles were white. "After everything you've done for them? After all the times you dropped everything to run over there? I don't believe it." Sarah, my thoughtful, empathetic daughter, was quieter, but her eyes were filled with a deep, hurt disappointment that was almost harder to see. "I don't understand," she said softly, shaking her head. "Their whole lives they've preached to us about family being the most important thing, about fairness. How could they do this to you, Mom? It doesn't make any sense." "They were scared, honey," I explained, my voice steady, echoing the analysis I had done myself. "And your Uncle Jason took advantage of that fear. He sold them a story, and they bought it because they were desperate to believe it. But that doesn't make it right, and I am not going to let it stand." I looked at both of them, my two wonderful children, and my heart swelled with a fierce maternal love. "I'm telling you this for two reasons. First, because you deserve to know the truth. But second, I need you to be my witnesses. I'm going to request one final family meeting to settle this. I need you both to be there. I don't want you to say a word unless I ask you to. I just need you to sit there and listen and represent the future of this family, a future that they are trying to sacrifice for the mistakes of the past." "We'll be there, Mom," Sarah said immediately, her voice firm with conviction. 100%. Ben nodded, his jaw set. "Whatever you need from us, we're on your team." My alliance was growing. It was no longer just me against them. My next call was back to Uncle Robert. It was time to bring him further into the fold.
"Uncle Robert," I said, my tone urgent but controlled. "It's worse than I thought. I've done some digging and I've discovered some things about Jason's financial situation that are deeply alarming. I believe he has systematically misled Mom and Dad and has put them in a very vulnerable position." I still didn't reveal the existence of the agreement. I framed it entirely as a concern for my parents' welfare, which was, in its own way, the truth. "I'm going to insist on a family meeting to get to the bottom of this. Would you be willing to attend, not just as a neutral party, but as Dad's brother, as someone who can speak truth to him?" "A neutral party?" he scoffed, his voice rumbling with indignation. "Linda, there's nothing neutral about a son potentially bankrupting his elderly parents through deceit. You tell me the time and the place. I'll be there. And I won't be neutral." The final piece of my strategic alliance was my lawyer. I scheduled another call with Evelyn Reed and updated her on everything I had discovered and every move I had made. I walked her through Jason's debts, the confirmation from Uncle Robert, the emotional testimony from Maria, and the allegiance of my own children. There was a long, appreciative silence on the other end of the line when I finished. "Linda," she said finally, and I could hear a note of genuine admiration in her voice, a rare thing from a woman so composed. "You've done in 1 week what would have taken my firm 6 months and tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees and private investigators to accomplish. You've built your case not on the shaky ground of the law, but on the bedrock of human nature. You have all the leverage you need." "So, what do I do now?" I asked, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. "Now," she said, her voice turning sharp and tactical again, "you set the meeting. You walk into that room knowing you control every piece on the board. Don't show them your whole hand at once. Let them think they're still in charge. Let the arrogant one preen. Let the others squirm. Then, when the moment is right, you calmly and methodically checkmate them." With my alliance solidified and my strategy blessed by Evelyn, the time for quiet investigation was over. The time for passive observation was over. It was time to force the confrontation, but it had to be on my terms, in a setting that I could, to some extent, control and define. A sterile lawyer's office felt too overtly aggressive. It would put them on the defensive immediately. A neutral location like a restaurant was too public. No, this had to happen on their home turf, in their living room, the very room where the promise of my inheritance was made and where the conspiracy to deny it was likely hatched. The symbolism was too powerful to ignore. I would defeat them in their own fortress. I waited until Friday morning to make the call. I wanted them to have the weekend to stew, to let their anxieties build. I dialed my mother's number, my hand steady, my breathing even. I was a general ordering the advance. "Mom," I said, my voice a carefully crafted blend of warmth and seriousness. "It's Linda." "How are you feeling?" "Oh, Linda, hello, dear," she replied, her voice a little strained. The fallout from Easter was still lingering. "I'm all right. Your father is having a good day." "That's wonderful to hear," I said. "Listen, the reason I'm calling is that I've been doing a lot of thinking this week about the future and plans and making sure you and Dad are taken care of properly. I was hoping we could all get together this weekend, just the family. There are a few things I think we all need to talk about, just to make sure we're all on the same page." There was a beat of charged silence on her end. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, the suspicion warring with her desire to maintain a veneer of normalcy. "Oh," she said, her voice a little too casual. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," I said smoothly. "It's just planning, making sure all the financial and legal matters are in order so there are no surprises down the road. I thought it would be good for Jason and me to both be there so we can present a united front of support for you and Dad. In fact, I was thinking of inviting Uncle Robert to join us as well. He's always been such a wise counsel for Dad. I think his perspective would be valuable." Every word was a strategic calculation. Mentioning a united front with Jason was a brilliant piece of misdirection, suggesting unity where there was division. Invoking Uncle Robert's name cloaked my request in a mantle of tradition and patriarchal respectability. It made my proposal sound responsible, thoughtful, and utterly conventional. It would be almost impossible for her to refuse without revealing her own anxiety and raising my father's suspicions. "Well, that's very thoughtful of you, Linda," she said, the hesitation still lacing her words, but the fight was already going out of her. She was being outmaneuvered. I suppose Sunday afternoon would work? I'll have to check with your brother." "Great," I said, pressing my advantage. "And Mom, I'm going to bring Sarah and Ben along too. I think it's important for them to start being part of these larger family discussions. They are the next generation, after all. This is their legacy we're talking about too." This, I knew, would be a jolt. The inclusion of her grandchildren changed the dynamic completely. They were no longer just dealing with the daughter they had wronged. They would be facing a jury of the young, innocent family members whose future they had also jeopardized. "Oh," she said, clearly taken aback. The silence on her end was longer this time. I could picture her, phone pressed to her ear, a dozen objections rising and dying on her lips. How could she say no? How could she argue that her own grandchildren shouldn't be present for a discussion about the family's future? She couldn't. I had backed her into a corner of her own making. "All right, dear," she finally conceded, her voice thin. "If you think that's best. We'll see you all on Sunday, around 2? 2 sounds perfect," I said, my voice betraying none of the cold triumph I felt. "We'll see you then." The stage was set. The actors had been summoned. The next 48 hours were a strange mixture of acute anxiety and a profound, steely calm. I felt like an actress preparing for the role of a lifetime. Mark and I went over the plan again and again, anticipating their reactions, their arguments, their denials. He played the role of Jason, of my father, of my mother, allowing me to rehearse my lines, to hone my responses until they were sharp and precise. I prepared my evidence with the care of a prosecutor. I created a simple, unassuming file folder. It didn't contain the explosive inheritance agreement. That was their weapon. Mine was different. My folder contained the public records of JS Ventures' collapse, the court filings detailing the lawsuits and the debts, a printout of the state tax lien, and, on top, a clean, professionally formatted spreadsheet summarizing the $62,000 of financial support I had provided for my parents over the last 2 years, with dates and check numbers. It was a folder of cold, hard, undeniable facts.
On Sunday, we drove to my parents' house in a deliberate, strategic convoy. 3 separate cars, Mark and me in ours, Sarah and hers, Ben and his. We met Uncle Robert, who had arrived a few minutes early, in the driveway. He was dressed in a tweed sport coat and looked more like a stern but fair-minded professor than a familial enforcer. He caught my eye and gave me a single, firm, reassuring nod. We were ready. We walked through the front door together, a unified, multi-generational front. The atmosphere inside the house was thick enough to cut with a knife. My mother's smile was a brittle, painted-on thing. My father, seated in his armchair, looked tired and deeply wary. And there, on the sofa, were the king and queen of the castle, Jason and his wife, Chloe. They looked relaxed, confident, almost smug. They thought this meeting was my last desperate appeal. They thought they were here to gently but firmly put me in my place. And of course, sitting in a wingback chair near my mother, positioned like a loyal lady-in-waiting, was my Aunt Susan. Her presence was an unexpected bonus. I had assumed she wouldn't be brave enough to attend. Her being there meant I could neutralize 2 of my primary adversaries at once. We all took our seats in the living room, the geography of the room itself a battlefield. It was the same room where my father had made his promise to me and Jason all those years ago. I deliberately chose a chair directly opposite him, forcing him to face me. My children, Sarah and Ben, sat together on a love seat, their faces serious and watchful, their youth and quiet dignity a stark contrast to the brittle tension of the older generation. Mark and Uncle Robert took the remaining armchairs, flanking the room like silent, immovable sentinels. Jason, ever arrogant, ever convinced of his own unassailable position, was the one to break the silence. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. "So, Linda," he began, his tone tripping with a false, magnanimous pity. "Mom said you called this big family summit. What's on your mind? If you're worried about Mom and Dad, don't be. I've got things well in hand." He glanced meaningfully at a sleek, leather-bound folder on the coffee table in front of him. It was the inheritance agreement. He had brought it with him, placed it there like a royal scepter, a symbol of his authority. He thought it was his greatest source of power. He had no idea it was a decoy, and that the real weapon was in the simple manila folder resting in my lap. I ignored him. I didn't even grace him with a glance. My focus was entirely and intensely on my father. This was it, the opening move of the endgame. I let Jason's arrogant words hang in the heavy air of the living room for a long, deliberate moment. The silence that followed was more powerful than any retort. It amplified his condescension, making it sound crass and juvenile. His smirk faltered slightly as he realized I wasn't going to take the bait. He expected tears or anger or a desperate appeal. He was not prepared for quiet, focused silence. My children sat perfectly still, their composure a stark rebuke to their uncle's bluster. They were my honor guard. Finally, when the tension was almost unbearable, I spoke. My voice was soft, but it was pitched to carry to every corner of the room. It was a voice of calm, measured authority. And I did not speak to Jason. I spoke to the man he had once been, the man I hoped, against all odds, still existed somewhere inside my father. "Dad," I began, my eyes locked on his. He shifted uncomfortably in his large leather armchair, his gaze darting away, unable to meet mine for more than a fleeting second. He looked at the fireplace, at the mantelpiece clock, anywhere but at his daughter. "You were thinking about something this week, something you said a long time ago. It's been on my mind a lot." I paused again, letting my words sink in, letting everyone in the room wonder where this was going.
I could see my mother's hands twisting the fabric of her dress in her lap. Aunt Susan's posture stiffened. They had expected a direct assault, a frontal attack on the agreement. This was something else. This was unexpected. "Do you remember the day of Grandma's funeral?" I asked, my voice gentle, almost nostalgic, as if I were sharing a fond memory. A flicker of something, memory, pain, perhaps guilt, crossed my father's face. He could not pretend not to remember that day. It was seared into our family's history. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Of course I do, Linda." "I remember it so clearly," I continued, my voice even and steady, weaving a picture with my words. "We were all standing right here, in this very room. The house was so full of people, but it felt so empty without her. You gathered Jason and me, and you put your arms around our shoulders." I saw Uncle Robert lean forward slightly in his chair, his eyes fixed on his older brother. He remembered. He was my first witness. "You were grieving," I went on, my gaze never leaving my father's face. "You were thinking about the future. You were thinking about legacy. Your legacy. Grandma's legacy." The word legacy hung in the air, imbued with a new, sharp meaning. "You told us that this house, this family, was a legacy that belonged to both of us, equally. You made us promise that we would always look out for each other. You said this house would always be a safe harbor for both of your children, and you looked right at me when you said it. You said, 'There are no distinctions here.' Do you remember saying that, Dad?" My father's face, already pale from his illness, seemed to lose another shade of color. A faint, mottled red crept up his neck. He swallowed hard, his throat working. He couldn't deny it. He couldn't claim he didn't remember. Not with his brother, his grandchildren, and his wife all watching him, all waiting for his answer. His silence was a confession. I remember. He finally looked at me, and in his eyes I saw exactly what I had hoped to see. Not anger, not defiance. I saw a deep, profound, and soul-crushing shame. I had landed the first blow of the battle, and it wasn't a legal argument or a financial claim. It was a memory, a promise. His own words, his own honor turned back on him like a mirror. I had reminded him not of what he had signed in a moment of weakness and fear, but of the man he was supposed to be, the father he had promised to be. The moral foundation of their entire position had just been fractured, and everyone in the room felt the tremor. Jason, seeing his father falter, seeing his carefully constructed kingdom begin to shake, jumped into the breach to regain control. His voice was sharp, impatient, and laced with panic.
"Oh, for crying out loud, Linda," he snapped, his condescension curdling into outright anger. "What is this? Some kind of emotional blackmail? That was 10 years ago. Things change. Life gets complicated. People have to make practical, adult decisions. Dad and Mom made a decision that was best for the long-term security of this family. It's all right here, in black and white." He slapped his hand down on the leather-bound folder on the coffee table, the sound startlingly loud in the quiet room. "It's done. It's legal. What is the point of dredging up some sentimental, irrelevant memory?" The moment he finished his tirade, I turned my head slowly to look at him, my expression unreadable. It was the first time I had acknowledged his presence. "I'm so glad you brought up practical adult decisions, Jason," I said, and my voice was no longer soft or nostalgic. It was cool, crisp, and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, because that's exactly what I want to talk about. I leaned forward, my movements calm and deliberate, and placed my own simple manila file folder on the table. It looked insignificant, almost pathetic, next to his impressive lawyer-prepared document. "You're right," I said, my gaze sweeping from my brother to my parents and back again. "Mom and Dad made a decision based on the information they had at the time. They made it to provide for this family's security. But the question we have to ask ourselves today, as adults making practical decisions, is this: did they have all the information? Did they make their decision based on the full and complete truth?" My mother, her face flushed with a mixture of anger and anxiety,
spoke up for the first time, her voice defensive, brittle. Linda, what on earth are you implying? Your brother has been completely open and honest with us about everything. Has he? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. My gaze settled on my brother, who was now looking at me not with anger, but with a dawning, naked apprehension. The hunter was beginning to realize he was the one in the trap. Has he been honest about the new promotion he supposedly got at work? Or has he been honest about the true financial state of his brilliant company, JS Ventures? The name dropped into the silent room like a stone into a still, deep pond. The ripples of its impact were immediate and visible. Jason's face went rigid. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. "I don't know what you're talking about, Linda," he said, but the bravado in his voice was gone, replaced with a thin, brittle denial that convinced no one. "Don't you?" I replied, my voice dropping even lower, forcing everyone to lean in to hear. "Because I do, and I think it's time that Mom and Dad, and everyone else in this room, did too." I reached for my folder, my movements slow and deliberate. The room was silent, save for the frantic ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, counting down the final seconds of my brother's charade. The air in the living room was now so thick with tension, it felt difficult to breathe. It was the charged electric silence before a lightning strike. Jason stared at my simple manila file folder as if it were a venomous snake, his carefully constructed composure crumbling into raw, undisguised panic. My mother looked from him to me, her expression a maelstrom of confusion, anger, and dawning fear. My father just looked defeated, a man waiting for a verdict he already knew would be guilty. JS Ventures, I repeated, letting the name hang in the air, each syllable a hammer blow against the fragile silence. A company founded with such promise 3 years ago. The company you told everyone was going to revolutionize digital marketing. The company you told Mom and Dad was a brilliant, can't-miss investment that would secure not only your future, but theirs as well. I shifted my gaze, slowly and deliberately, to my parents. I wasn't angry at them anymore. In this moment, I saw them with a terrible, piercing clarity. Two frightened, elderly people who had been duped by the son they adored. "What he didn't tell you," I said, my voice soft but carrying an undeniable weight of authority, "is that JS Ventures no longer exists. It was officially and involuntarily dissolved by the state 2 months ago. It didn't just fail, Mom. It collapsed. It imploded under a mountain of debt and mismanagement." "That's a lie!" Jason shouted, lurching to his feet, his face flushed a blotchy, furious red. His panic was tipping over into aggression. "You have no idea what you're talking about, Linda. You're just bitter because you were left out. You're making things up to hurt me, to hurt this family." "Am I?" I asked calmly. I reached into my folder, my movements slow and precise, and pulled out the first sheet of paper. "This," I announced to the room, "is a public court filing from the state of Delaware where Jason chose to incorporate his company. It's dated 6 weeks ago. It's a lawsuit filed by one of his primary vendors, a web services company. They're suing you, Jason, for non-payment of invoices totaling $152,400. I placed the document on the coffee table, facing them, the damning legal text clearly visible. "This," I said, pulling out a second sheet of paper, "is a notice of default on a small business loan from Main Street Commercial Bank. It seems you're behind on your payments, Jason, by over $83,000. I placed it neatly next to the first. The evidence was mounting, a silent, damning testament to his lies. Jason's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air. "And this," I said, my voice dropping as I produced the final multi-page document from my folder,
This is the big one. This is a copy of the public notice of the state tax lien filed against the company for unpaid payroll taxes. And this is a list of all the registered creditors from the company's dissolution paperwork. The total amount of debt that you, Jason, are personally liable for, Mom, Dad, is just over $500,000. A collective gasp sucked the remaining air out of the room. My mother put a trembling hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with sheer, uncomprehending horror. Aunt Susan, who had been watching with a smug, knowing look, now looked as if she had been slapped. Uncle Robert slowly, gravely shook his head, his expression of grim, sorrowful understanding. He had suspected foolishness. He had not suspected a disaster of this magnitude. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but it felt necessary. I hope it might resonate with some of you in some small way. This story of mine, does it remind you of anything in your own life? Have you ever felt that your sacrifices were not appreciated or that your worth was being decided by someone else? I would genuinely love to hear your perspective in the comments below.